영어 동화 세상 리틀팍스.
A Dog of Flanders. Chapter 1. The Story of Patrasche. People say that the dog is man's best friend. They say this because dogs are loyal and loving pets. Unfortunately, man is not always a good friend to dogs. This was the case with Patrasche and his master. Patrasche was a beautiful sandy-colored working dog from Flanders in Belgium. Dogs from Flanders were famous because they were so strong. They could pull heavy carts and work hard for hours like small horses. When Patrasche was still a puppy, he was sold to a merchant. His new master sold pots and pans for a living. He traveled all over Belgium with his cart of goods, from the blue sea to the green mountains. Patrasche's master was a drunkard and a fat, mean man. He piled his cart high with pans, buckets, jars, brass tins, and cooking pots. Whenever Patrasche tired from the heavy load, his master beat him without mercy. One day, Patrasche was pulling the cart along a straight, dusty road. They were heading to the lovely city of Antwerp, where the great painter Rubens once lived. The merchant walked lazily beside the cart, smoking a pipe. It was the middle of summer and very warm. Patrasche's master stopped at every wine shop along the way. But poor Patrasche, his master never unhooked him from the cart or gave him a drink of water. Patrasche was exhausted, but he was a hard-working dog and kept walking. When he started to slow down, his master hit him with a whip.
Patrasche, you stupid dog! Go faster!
He yelled. The whip stung Patrasche's side. His eyes were full of dust and his muscles ached.
Lazy beast!
Yelled his master.
We must reach Antwerp tonight! There is a market there tomorrow.
Still Patrasche pulled with his tired legs, but the effort was too much. He staggered and fell over on his side. He lay in the middle of the dusty road, motionless in the full heat of the sun. Patrasche's cruel master gave him his usual medicine, a kick in the ribs and a lash from his whip. Patrasche had received beatings many times before, but this time he did not move or cry. The merchant cursed Patrasche.
Get up, you lazy dog!
He shouted.
We've still got 3 miles to walk.
But Patrasche did not hear him. He was too tired even to feel his master's blows. The merchant cursed the poor dog again. He kicked his body off the road and into the grass. Patrasche's master lifted the front of the cart. With a frown and a moan, he began to pull it down the road. For 2 long, cruel years, Patrasche had worked for his master from morning to night. He had been loyal and strong, but the merchant had forgotten him already. Muttering to himself as he pulled his cart, the merchant left Patrasche to die.
When I reach the next village, I'll steal the first dog I see wandering around.
The merchant thought. He kept walking and didn't look back. Poor Patrasche was too exhausted even to lift his head and moan. A Dog of Flanders, Chapter 2, A New Home. Patrasche lay still in the grass ditch. His cruel master had left him and was now far away. The road was busy and hundreds of people passed by. Some were on foot and some rode horses. Some people saw him, but most did not even look. No one stopped. A dead dog was not worth a thought. After a while, a little old man who was bent and lame came by. A little boy walked with him. The old man looked at the dog with pity, and the little boy too. They knelt down beside the dog. With much effort, the old man lifted Patrasche out of the ditch. Then he and the boy carried Patrasche back home to their little hut. The old man's name was Johann. When Johann had turned 80, his daughter had died. He was asked to look after her 2-year-old son. The old man could barely support himself, but he took the little boy willingly. Johann's grandson was named Nello. They lived at the edge of a small village in a small but clean mud hut. They kept a little garden where they grew beans and pumpkins and herbs. There were only 24 houses in the village. Their walls were painted white and shone in the sun like snow. They had colorful red roofs and shutters of bright green or sky blue. In the center of the village stood a red windmill. Around Johann's hut stretched flat pastures and fields of corn. A great canal ran through the village and the fields. On both sides of the canal, long lines of poplar trees bent their branches in the breeze. Across the fields, the distant town of Antwerp was just visible on the horizon. But the tall spire of the Antwerp Cathedral stood out. It shone bright in the morning sun, and at dusk its shadow stood out against the clouds. Johann and Nello made Patrasche a little straw bed in the corner of their hut. He was very weak, but still alive. For many days, Patrasche lay there, not moving. At night, Nello stayed awake, listening anxiously to his breathing. Johann could not give Patrasche much food. He barely had enough for himself and his grandson. In his youth, Johann had been a soldier, but his leg had been injured during the war. This made it difficult for him to work, and he had been poor ever since. Some days Johann and Nello had nothing to eat. But even though their lives were hard, they were content. Johann was very gentle and good to the boy, and the boy was beautiful, truthful, and kind. During Patrasche's long recovery, Nello and his grandfather grew very fond of him. Nello leaned his cheek against Patrasche's fur at night, and they both slept soundly. Patrasche became part of their little family. One day, Patrasche made a noise, a little bark. Johann and Nello laughed, and then wept with joy. Little Nello made a necklace of flowers for Patrasche and hugged him around his huge neck. Patrasche was getting better. A few weeks later, Patraschu's health and strength returned. He stood up, and his big brown eyes showed surprise. Nobody was hitting him or cursing him. He looked lovingly at Johann and Nello. He owed them his life. A Dog of Flanders, Chapter 3. Patrasche Works Again. Old Johann, little Nello, and Patrasche, the great working dog of Flanders, lived happily together. Their meals came from their little garden. They had only a little money, which Johann earned by delivering milk. Every day, Johann filled a little green cart with cans of milk from his neighbors. He pulled the cart to Antwerp, where he sold the milk. Johann's neighbors knew he was an honest man. They happily let him deliver their milk and collect the money for them. But it was becoming hard work for the old man. He was 83, and the town of Antwerp was 3 miles away. Nello was too little to help, and every day the trip took Johann longer and longer. When Patrasche was well again, he watched Johann load the milk cans onto his cart. Then he watched as Johann started slowly down the road. The next morning, Patrasche jumped up from his straw bed. He went over to Johann and pushed him happily with his nose.
"What are you doing, Patrasche?"
The old man scolded playfully.
"Come on out of my way. I have to take this milk into town."
Patrasche walked over to the cart and barked. Patrasche placed himself between the cart's handles and stood patiently. He wanted to show Johann that he could pull the cart. Although Johann understood, he resisted Patrasche's idea. Johann thought it was wrong to make dogs work like slaves. Johann tried to shoo him away, but Patrasche was stubborn. He tried to pull the cart with his teeth and managed to move it a little. Then he stood patiently again, as if to say,
I am a strong dog, and I can help.
Eventually, Johann smiled.
"You are a very persistent dog,"
he said, patting him. Johann understood that Patrasche was grateful. He knew Patrasche wanted to repay him for everything he had done. That evening, Johann made a harness for Patrasche. After that, Patrasche dutifully pulled the cart every morning. The bells on his harness jingled as he walked. Whenever Johann tried to help, Patrasche barked. It was as if he were saying,
It is my job, and I will do my duty.
Sadly, Johann grew weaker. When the winter came, he was thankful for Patrasche's help. Snow and mud covered the road. Without Patrasche, he would not have been able to deliver the milk through the cold. But for Patrasche, the work seemed like heaven. It was fun to pull the bright green cart with its shiny brass milk cans. No one whipped him. Instead, the kind old man walked beside him, often giving him a gentle pat. Besides, Patrasche finished his work by early afternoon. Then he was free to do as he wished. To stretch, to sleep in the sun, to wander in the fields, or to play with other dogs. Patrasche was happiest of all when he played with Nello. Nello and Patrasche were best friends. In fact, they were very similar. They were both orphans, and Johann had looked after them both and saved their lives. Since Patrasche first arrived at the little hut, the friendship between the boy and the dog had strengthened every day. They played together every afternoon and loved each other greatly. The big dog and little Nello were never long apart.